At the bottom, you should see your microphone, your camera, security, participants, chat, and share screen.
Video settings, no, it's not here. Sorry.
Nicola, do you want to send me your slides and I could share for you while you present?
Yes, sure. Thank you.
Here, I'll put my email in the chat.
Thank you. Sorry, I had this working earlier. Now, for some reason,
All right, it happens.
technological abilities are not the most favorable. Share screen. There is the option now.
Great.
Start from the beginning. Okay, are we here?
Yeah.
Serious apologies, everybody. I'm just going to minimize that. You all hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm sorry about that. Afternoon, good evening. It's really a great privilege to be here with everyone and to be able to share my learnings and reflections of the capstone project that I did. And I chose to do the creative option and a guest code of conduct for our organization entitled Our Altered Code. As a brief introduction, I'm the head of community at Stay Altered. And today I'll just be sharing a little bit more about the journey of developing our Altered Code and the guest code of conduct, the framework within our 3 IPs, and the wider applications for our guests. The code itself is currently a working draft and will be published over the next few weeks with further collaboration from our community, although it is currently available for viewing with all my references included. So this is quite a personal journey for me, and it starts a few years ago when I met the founder of Stay Altered, Evan Sang, at the Yard in Bangkok with Som and Som, who are the hosts there. And then we spent a little bit of time together at Song of Travel in Myanmar. And Evan's journey brought him to really unpacking hospitality in the independent host space and thinking at a deeper level of how to celebrate and support independent hosts like Som and Som and Fiona. At its foundation, Stay Altered really exists to rewrite the relationship between hosts and guests and what it means to live hospitably, to care for one another and all life on earth. And digging deeper over the last few years about the dark truth of tourism leakage has really strengthened our desire to support independent hosts in focusing on community-powered tourism, where revenue generated is directly redistributed back into local economies and not foreign ones. And I will refer to Laura Rankin, who is currently completing her MBA in Sustainability Solutions and a fellow student at RISE, who writes that at its core, tourism leakage really is unethical, extractive, and ultimately contributes to the perpetuation of colonial ideologies and inequality, as well as the erosion of natural and cultural resources. It's believed that independent micro, small, and medium enterprises recirculate as much as 3 times more revenue back into their local economies. And Stay Altered recognizes the opportunity we have to support over half of the world's accommodations and the impact we can make in the world. So it's really from this lens of equity and inclusion that Stay Altered's business model and community-powered approach is underpinned, one that is collaborative, participatory, rather than extractive and continuing oppressive practices. Our Altered community encompasses a broad ecosystem of values-aligned players, which includes our independent hosts, global guests, local and global neighbors, partners, and contributors. And together, we're exploring how to minimize extraction and maximize the positive impact in local communities through altering hospitality for good. So our 3 IPs, which are Inspiring People, Incredible Places, and Impactful Planets, are part of our pillars that help define the host that we support and the hospitality that we're fighting for. Over the years, we've spoken to hundreds of independent hosts, wanting to assess how we can better support them and their local communities. And what we've heard is that they're not only wanting better and more direct bookings to contribute back to their local neighbors, but also better guests, conscientious guests. We've embarked on a journey to understand what it means to be a better guest, trying to unpack who that is and how do we reach them. So these are some of our hosts that joined us over the last few years. And our movement has really grown from a few intrigued hosts to now including over 47 hosts across 19 countries and growing. We are taking on a monumental task in the industry with certain partners that share our complementary objectives. This is actually what brought me to meeting Vinci at Rise, one of our treasured partners, and learning to understand how we can support guests to be more mindful travelers. And through the flagship course, I embarked on more of a personal inquiry around visitor behavior and how I could further contribute to supporting our mission. And the starting point for this work really is as an inclusive and non-punitive ethical code, not as a guest policy manual for sustainable and ethical tourism, to really serve as a blueprint of best practices to guide and inspire guests on how to travel mindfully, responsibly, and joyfully. We want to ensure that our hosts are considered while our guests are safe, educated, and equipped to make informed choices. So I was deeply inspired by the work of Michael Ben Eli from the Sustainability Laboratory and his work around sustainability and the 5 core principles. Notably, he mentioned the spiritual domain as a key domain to writing sustainability. And he writes that the spiritual domain identifies the necessary attitudinal orientation and provides the basis for a universal code of ethics. And I feel that sustainability cannot leave out the intentionality and the spiritual essence that Eli addresses here. So over the past few weeks in the development of the code, I've reviewed many different travel guides, policies, practices, and ethical codes of travel organizations and regulatory boards, which are all referenced in my working document. We've considered the views and insights from various voices within our ecosystem to make sure they are represented and accounted for to the best of our ability. And this is also in line with Stay Altered's values in the spirit of collaboration and with our participatory approach to decision making. So in creating our altered code and reframing and categorizing the visitor guidelines, I have used our 3 IPs as the framework, which are Incredible Places, Inspiring People, and Impactful Planet. And these are all deeply interconnected and interdependent, which also speaks to the complexity we're facing in unlearning and challenging the sustainability of the current tourism landscape. I'd like to just share a few guidelines under each of our 3 IPs that I've addressed within the Altered Code. The first one around inspiring people really speaks to the opportunity we have in travel to intentionally reconnect with our shared humanity. We've used the Inner Development Goals as the underpinning framework to which we can really develop in our transformational skills for sustainable development. And the IDGs, the Inner Development Goals, tie back to or were developed for supporting the 17 interlinked sustainability goals and how we could reach that. So speaking into the transformational growth in trying to look at the socioeconomic and environmental impact. And through this framework, we are looking at committing to learning and unlearning the what has been passed down to us. So really strengthening our capacity to critically engage, emotionally reflect with sensitive inquiry. And a big one for us is advocating for diversity and inclusivity. And I've just taken an excerpt from Wild Lebanzi in South Africa from their website, speaking to their values. And they say that, you know, South Africa is a powerful mix of politics, people, and complexities that frame the context of our lives post-apartheid. And for these reasons, they don't accept any guests who are racist, sexist, ageist, homophobic, xenophobic, ethnophobic, or a horrible person in any way. And, you know, it goes more to speaking into that diversity and inclusivity. The second IP that we address in our Altered Code speaks to Incredible Places, and this is fundamentally around prioritizing local and independent providers, really tapping into the heart of redistributing that revenue as directly as possible where the money is being spent. We encourage guests to contextualize their visits, understanding the history, political climate, religions, social systems, and the colonial narratives and biases that exist in the places that they are visiting. So really questioning the impact of their choices, and this speaks to where they're visiting and why. Is it a responsible and sustainable choice, or is it possibly perpetuating further extractive practices fueled by over-tourism and possibly Instagrammable trends? And following the lead of the locals, this also speaks to adhering to local laws and practices, familiarizing ourselves with and respecting the values, behaviors, cultures, customs, and practices, regardless of whether we share those beliefs or not. And I'd just like to quote the Muhan Collective, one of our hosts in India, that specifically speaks to their homestay collection and the communities. And they really ask that guests please treat the places they visit like our home and lend a helping hand where we can. Lastly, under our 3 IPs, we've got Impactful Planet. And this speaks to the overarching goal of the sustainability, the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And each of our hosts have an altered neighbor that they directly contribute to or support. So within this context, you know, just recognizing the impact that we have through the decisions we make. We've spoken and addressed the impact of the media, ensuring this ethical representation, and that our documenting through media is contextualized, ethical, and empowering. and noted around geotagging and sensitively just making sure that we're not contributing to over-tourism and overexposure of specific places and sites or drawing threat to protected species. And we've addressed socioeconomic impact as well as cultural impact, observing the power dynamics at play and supporting genuine cultural endeavors that keep cultural heritage and indigenous knowledge alive, and the passing down of traditional skills that also instill local pride. Within environmental impact and speaking into wilderness and wildlife, we really encourage guests to foster a deep appreciation for wildlife and the interconnectedness of all life on the planet. And just another thing we mention is around resource matching according to the consumption levels that are available in the country you're visiting, and to give more than you take. And lastly, within our code, we really speak into celebrating our travels and the transformative power that it can have in impacting the planet. So here I'd just like to share an example of where guests can obtain extensive, vetted, values-driven partners for further educational resources. And I'm incredibly grateful for the partnership that we have with RISE, which demonstrates the shared benefits and the multiplying effects we can have in the industry. So the big question is, what now? I've mentioned our altered code is currently a living document, and we will be presenting this to our Greater Altered community on the 6th of February, and for further input and discussion, as well as starting to pressure test the validity. We're still trying to determine the best case use for our code and how to measure the impact. We're in the process of considering this in collaboration with our hosts. We've updated our onboarding processes to include additional questions of how to better understand how we support our hosts and how they can motivate their guests to be more conscious. And over time, we'll be measuring this in the perception of visitors' behavior through our hosts. We do intend to publish a simplified version, including an infographic to make it more accessible and not as lengthy, where guests can also access the full code if they feel called to and to contribute. And no, I will not be designing it. And this is just some of our hosts and the incredible properties around the world that we're collaborating alongside, that are currently listed on our website. And really our intention or hope for the vision is to create a booking and rewards platform that's not only to support our hosts in the redistribution of profits back into their local communities, but really to continue incentivizing new ways to inspire guests to travel and think about how they do so. This is just a little infographic that I often come back to when I think about what we really are doing at the heart of it. And for me, it's about being part of the tide that rises and lifts all boats to make sure there is greater inclusivity and accessibility for all. And lastly, we hope to heighten the demand for better travel practices in doing our part in altering hospitality for good. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've got time for one question. Does anyone here in the room have a question, or anyone in the chat want to ask a question of our presenter? Well, if you think of anything, feel free to put it in the chat for Nicola to read later. Thank you so much.
I actually have a
Vinci has a question.
Hey, Nicola,
Hi,
thank you for
Nancy.
calling in. Thank you for calling in from South Africa. And we're really, really glad and honored to have you in the program. And I had the privilege to see the guest code of conduct coming into fruition. And I would love to see how it is implemented. And so please keep Rise in the loop. And we would love to help amplify that because it's a very solid project, like with a few pages of suggestions for guests and how they can be more responsible and mindful. And so like I would really love to see the impact of this guest code of conduct. And so you and I, like we should be talking more about like how to measure impact over time. And so that's a conversation that we're gonna have in the near future. So keep us posted when you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Vinci. I really appreciate it and your contribution to the creation of the code. So thank you all.
Thank you. So we're gonna move on to our next presentation so that we make sure we have time for everyone. Thank you so much. There is a link to their website in the chat if you want to take a look at that. So our next presenter is Bernarda Bustillos Tobar, and she's a tourism professional with over 12 years of experience in tourism, leading companies within the Ecuador sector. And her presentation today is about optimizing the communication process between the indigenous community Sinchi Warmi and tourists through the development of an educational tourism brochure for sustainable conservation of the environment and local culture. So take it away.
Okay, good afternoon with everyone. Just give me a minute, please. I would like to, just a minute, please. There's, okay. I have a problem with it's a video, so I can see the play right now. Just a minute. There is. Okay. So good afternoon with everyone. My name is Bernarda. I'm from Ecuador. I have been a volunteer with Rise Travel Institute around 1 year, and they give me the opportunity to study the flagship program. And today I am pleased to present my capstone project. For this project, I decided to work with a local community from my country. And I would like to say a special mention to Melissa Andy. She is a leader of this community, and she's joining us to this event. So thank you so much, Melissa. And the title of this project is Optimizing the Communication Process between the Indigenous Communities in Chihuahua and Tourists through the Development of an Educational Tourism Brochure for Sustainable Conservation of the Environment and Local Culture. Just to give you an idea of the structure of this presentation, this is the content. We will have an overview, and also I have a video, and this is a video from Melissa from the Amazon region. She wants to send some greetings to Rise Travel Institute and to all the students. So we are going to have a small video here.
Alpunja, buenos días. Un saludo fraterno a Rise Travel Institute. Desde Ecuador, enviamos este fraterno saludo para ustedes. Mi nombre es Melissa Andy, soy de la cultura quichua hablante. Me gustaría presentar o dar a conocer un poco de Sinchi Warmi. Sinchi Warmi está ubicada en la provincia de Napo, en la parroquia Misahualí, en la Amazonía. Sinchi Warmi significa mujeres valientes, en el cual ellas vienen trabajando 15 años en la parte de turismo sostenible, educación ambiental, gastronomía, cultura. Queremos que se conecten este 1 de febrero a la 1:20 de la tarde por Zoom, en el cual estaremos realizando este lanzamiento de una guía en el país de Estados Unidos. Entonces, queremos invitar a que se conecten y de esa manera puedan conocer nuestro proyecto. Ashka Pagracho.
Okay, thank you so much, Melissa. And an overview about Sinchiwarmi. This community is located in the Amazon region of
Queremos que
of
se
Ecuador.
conecten este 1 de febrero
Sorry.
a la 1:20 de la
Okay, sorry about that. So an overview about Sinchiwarmi community. They are located in the Amazon region of Ecuador in Napo province and next to a small town in Tena. And it's important to mention a little about the story of Sinchiwarmi and Quechua community. Quechuas were originally located in the highlands of Ecuador during the colonial times. And they faced economical and physical slavery. So many of them decided to migrate to the heart of the jungle in search of freedom from the oppression. And they settled in the small towns in the Amazon region of Ecuador. In recent times, they are proudly maintain their cultural heritage, their traditions, and of course, their Quechua language. And they are actively fighting for their rights and for the preservation of their ancestral lands. Maybe you are asking, what is the meaning of Sinchiwarmi? The meaning of Sinchiwarmi is a strong woman. And that is the reason why I decided to choose this community, because it's led by a group of women, of Quechua women. So now I am going to explain you a little bit more about the story of Sinchiwarmi. In 2002, a group of women tired of the traditional indigenous perspective, where only man should provide everything for the family, came together to explore economic alternatives to support their families and children. This effort was led by Betty Chimbo. Betty Chimbo was one of the leaders of the community, and they started working with the creation of Amazonian crafts. And over the time, the women of the community got some trainings in different activities like cooking, baking, organic farming, hospitality, and much more. But it's important to mention that they tried to get the support from the government, but the local government didn't help them, because it's sad to say, but in Ecuador, we still have racism. So the community tried to search for support from international organizations like Selva y Desarrollo. And this organization helped them to finish the construction of the restaurant. And 3 years later, they also helped them to finish the construction of the community center and the construction of some cottages where the community offer accommodation services. And nowadays, Sinchiwarmi community has around 12 years of experience offering high quality services and authentic experiences. Per year, they handle around 2,400 tourists, international and national tourists. And all the income that they got from the clients, they reinvest in the community. And also, all the people that work in the community are part of the Quechua community, and they got a salary. Okay, so now with an idea of the story of Sinchiwarmi, we are going to talk about the problem identification. After working with the community through a SWOT analysis and following the guidelines of the Canada Guideline for Developing Authentic Indigenous Experiences, I conclude that the Sinchiwarmi Community Project is at the export-ready stage. And what means that? It means that this project is ready because they have a solid website, they understand about prices, commissions, they have a good relationship with travel agents and tour operators, they handle international and national tourists, and much more. However, I identified some issues, such as insufficient project promotion, lack of economic resources. Despite they have incomes from their clients, it's not enough to invest in promotion. They have an insufficient quality of information provided by the community to tourists, the lack of information accessibility, and also I found that they don't have information material in other languages. They only have in Spanish. So as a conclusion, this investigation highlights the need for improvement in the communication process between the Indigenous community members and their clients. The lack of quality information and limited accessibility generate negative impacts on the community and also on the tourist experience, leading to unintentional disrespect or maybe an inappropriate behaviors. And to address this, I propose the creation of an educational tourist brochure. And here is where we have the research questions. How can the quality of information provided by the community to the tourists be improved through the creation of a tourist brochure? What strategies can ensure that the information in the brochure meets the global community tourism standards? So the brochure is a practical solution to address this issue and the lack of information in the community. Its goal is to preserve the local culture and foster the environmental conservation while offering visitors accurate, enriching, and authentic information and preventing negative impacts to contribute to the sustainable development of the community. What are the objectives? The first one is to design the format and the structure of the tourist brochure, have information, detailed historical information about Sinchiwarmi community, develop the behavior protocols for responsible tourism, and create a dissemination and distribution plan. And for the content to create the brochure, I use stories and testimonials from community members. This information provides a personal perspective that allows tourists to have a better understanding about the local culture and establish a deeper emotional connection with the experience. I also use the Canada's national guidelines to create the behavior protocols and the theory of defined domains of the sustainable travel. Finally, we have the dissemination and distribution plan. First of all, we have to know and understand about our target audience. In this case, will be tourists seeking for authentic cultural experiences, local and regional residents, and also international tourists. We will have an online distribution strategies. For example, to upload the brochure to the website, to the social media, send by email the brochure, share with their partnerships and online advertising. And also we would like to have like a distribution strategy. We don't like to print too many brochures because we like to be eco-friendly, but in some cases the community need it. So the idea is they can share this brochure in some events. And that's it. Thank you so much for all your attention.
Before we get to questions, there's been a lot of consensus in the chat that it was a wonderful video that you shared with us and everyone really appreciates it. It was a great addition to your presentation. So thank you. And now we're going to open the floor up to questions. If you have questions, you could put them in the chat. You can raise your hand in person. You can unmute yourself.
Can I just make a very quick comment? Thank you so much, Bernie. I really appreciate that I've been to a lot of conferences where there were presentations talking about indigenous communities. However, very oftentimes, their voices are actually left out in these presentations. I really appreciate that you showed us the video and please express our gratitude to your friend and staff. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
We've got time for one last question, if anyone has one, and then we'll move on. Do you have a question? No? Okay. Well then, we do have a question. All right, Vinci.
Bernie, I want to know, what is the progress with your brochure? Are you helping this community develop this brochure right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, the brochure is ready. I could send it to you so you could check it. It's ready, and we are trying to use a QR so the community could use the QR when tourists arrive to the community, and they only could read the QR and get the brochure. So yes, right now is ready, and they want to start using it.
And so have you done any research on the visitor demographic and see what languages do you need to translate the brochure into? Is it currently in English?
Right now is in Spanish and English because most of the tourists, the international tourists, are from the US. So for now, we have the brochure in English and Spanish.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone is planning a trip to Ecuador soon, reach out. It's be really great fishing. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're now going to move on to our next presenter. So Joseph Koch is an experienced finance and grants manager who has previously worked in education, public relations, and information technology. And his presentation is called How to Help Without Hurting, a look at the best ways to help others when traveling. And just a reminder, if you're not presenting or asking a question, if you could please put yourself on mute, we'd really appreciate it. Joseph, take it away.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us. So the look is at the best ways to help others when traveling, but it's really more, that's looking at a very general sense. The specific look that we're looking at is in Africa, and we're looking at wells in Africa. And just a little background, I do volunteer with Rise Travel right now, and I'm a grant writer for Rise Travel. So that's my background. And I have traveled extensively, nearly 150 countries and about 30 countries in Africa. So that's where the interest is. So when we talk about helping others, then the first part of this then is When Helping Hurts is a book that I read. And it talks about different ways then that you can help others. And this is largely through service projects. And the first is through relief. And when we look at a relief project, it is nearly 100%. The volunteers coming down, there's very little local input. It's often after a disaster or emergency. So, for example, there's a hurricane and the roof comes flying off. of a building. People come down, very little local input. They fix the roof and then they leave. The second is rehabilitation. That's more of an 80-20 look, I guess. We're 20% of local, so there is some local input, but it's largely the volunteers coming down. And this is what has become more of a traditional type of aid. So it's a project, maybe you go to a school, you bring some maybe some computer supplies down, you help paint the school, maybe you build a fence so animals don't come in, and then you leave and it's over basically. And the third is development. It's more of a 50-50 true partnership. So in other words, this is more of a long-term partnership. The first two are short-term and not the best, according to this book, and I tend to agree. But there's a true partnership with the local population and the people coming down, and it's long-term. So you don't just go down and then leave afterwards. So that's the book, When Helping Hurts. And that's some of the background as far as what's the best way then to help people. Also, then when we're talking about service projects, the IPARD model for service. So Pathinator PTL is a side business that I started and led trips overseas, and we use this IPARD model. So I and P is the investigate and plan part. That's before a trip. And that is, again, we're looking at a little bit more of the local input and trying to figure out the trip and what's the best way to help. A as action, it's the actual trip. And then R and D are reflect and demonstrate. So it's after the trip. So it's also important then after the trip that you kind of close the loop and you're helping, you continue to help the people, or after you return home, you're talking to other people about what you've learned. So it's both local input and it's not just a one-time deal and you leave. So we use that model on our trips. And that gets into RISE and this idea of sustainable travel tied in with local input. And the area of the course that I've mentioned a couple times already is volunteering, the volunteerism trips. That's the chapter I guess I'm emphasizing the most here. And the couple, there's several articles, but the couple articles that struck me is actually was a YouTube video, the Love You Give, which talked about an orphanage and visiting an orphanage, and some of the students or the kids weren't actually orphans. The people came down, the volunteers came down, and then after a couple of weeks left, and some of the kids were connected to those volunteers and the kind of the physical and mental trauma that was part of that orphanage. And when I did travel through Africa, I heard that several times by people saying that orphanages, at least some of them, could be scams. And the other article that struck me was lessons I learned. And I got off into this idea of one-off projects, which we talked about the relief and rehab as opposed to development. That's what they're getting at, the one-off projects that make the people that come down feel good, but it does really very little to actually help the local population, can actually take from the local population. So those were part of RISE Travel. Some other articles that tied in as well was Panacea or Pandora's Box. I dealt with ecotourism and again, stress the importance of local input. And if those type of tours fail, it's largely because there was no local input. And then another article that looked at around the mid-20th century that international development projects failed, according to the research, because of lack of local input. So we've known this for several years, over 50 years. It's just slow changing. And then getting a little bit more specific, we're looking at projects in Africa, not necessarily the wells yet, but projects in Africa and why they might succeed and why they might fail. So the first article there by the PM World Journal looks at, they did research and they looked at really three main areas where a project might fail. One is corruption. He notes then that it is definitely in existence, but he contends that it's a bit exaggerated. He said that there's one project that failed specifically because of corruption, but it is noted that it is an issue according to this article then. Second is lack of skills, training, management. And then the third is lack of local input. So we are seeing a trend here as far as lack of local input. And he kind of ranked, it's kind of reverse rank order. He would say probably 3 is the most important, 2, and then 1 of those 3. And the other article you see on the bottom then has some similar viewpoints. Then the first one is a little bit different, but he's arguing that when people come in on different projects, the management is really a one size fits all, and there's no really size or scope. So they don't really, they can't really adapt. There's no flexibility. So that's one issue, the management style, I guess. And then 2 and 3 are similar ones when we talk about corruption, and this author argues that corruption is a bigger deal. He cites one example, Chad Cameron oil line, and that Chad's leader basically just took the money. So he looks at corruption as a bigger issue than the first author. And then again, local buy-ins. And he notes playgrounds in Africa. And this is just something that was of interest to me because I was traveling in East Africa. I met a group that was doing playgrounds as tourism, volunteerism. And I asked, just growing up, I grew up, fairly poor. Why are you creating a playground when there's a need for water, food, and some of the basics? And she said, well, there's a sense of normalcy as well that the children will have when they have a playground, which actually sounded pretty good to me. So going back to this article, they talk about a playground like a merry-go-round where the kids would go around the merry-go-round. And then as that happens, the kinetic energy would pump up water. So that sounded good to me. But when they talked about this, they noted then that the playgrounds in the morning is when they need water, and the kids would naturally be at school or doing something else. So that water, they won't be on the merry-go-rounds, and older people or sometimes even elderly people had to basically pump the well through the merry-go-rounds, and it could be actually dangerous. So the idea that if you had any type of local buy-in and any understanding of that, that situation wouldn't happen, or you could think of something else. Getting more specific into wells in Africa, the actual problem is definitely there. CDC reports 780 million people without clean water. Ojomo, that article notes that 60% of wells fail in Africa. He himself helped finance and build 5, and only one's working. So that definitely backs up that statistic. And then also that $360 million have been spent on wells, but nearly 50,000 are working. Again, local input and not following up. As you go down the article here, you'll see the Guardian article that looks at a specific well that was built. And the author notes that there's worms in the well, feces. It was a shallow well built by charity that built it, didn't really know what they're doing, and then just left. So that's the issue. And then she continues into different areas as far as what's the best way for water, wells, pipes, boreholes, and rain harvesting. So that kind of goes in a little bit different direction, but I thought it was kind of an interesting article if you're looking to help what is the best way. And then the idea that again, that there's no spare parts, train mechanics leave, and as other issues that was noted. So we start to get into solutions a little bit more. Charity Water then is a nonprofit that helps, especially in the majority of the wells are there throughout the world, but the majority of the wells are in sub-Saharan Africa. And Urge to Help is the organization that reviewed them. So they have a few things going. One is the 100% model, which is actually really their marketing model. And they talk about the spring and the well. So the spring is basically, if I donated over their website or any of us donated over their website, 100% of their money is going to the spring, as they would call it, which is the wells basically, or the water supply. And the well then is they have some wealthy donors and some organizations, companies that donate, and that goes to the well, which is the overhead, which is the employees and then costs, stuff like that. So they can really say that 100% of your money is going to get water, largely in sub-Saharan Africa. And they argue it's a human right. So the water is actually free. And they get into this idea of privatization, that the idea then that the government public funding hasn't worked. And they also talk about local tie-in, which is good. And the local tie-in is they do consult. They admit themselves that they can't build the wells that well, this organization, that they do need help. So there's local tie-in, and then they also, I guess you call it subcontract through 16 different organizations that are international organizations that do know how to build wells and to make those connections. So the review Urge to Help has of Charity Water is they do recognize 1 million people have been helped. There is local input, which is a positive. One concern is if you donate to Charity Water and then they donate to one of those 16 organizations, that organization, there might be an organization that doesn't really match with your values or what you want to do. The spring well breakdown, they were a little bit concerned because they couldn't really see how much was dedicated to admin versus, directly. They think it's somewhere between 23 to 31% to the well. But again, they could say that, yes, that is true, that your money does go 100% to the spring or to the waters. And the transparency actually was fairly good as far as at least where the money is spent. But there's really not a lot of statistics on how much the increased water supply helped. And privatization, they're kind of in between what's the best way. They recognize privatization could be helpful, but noted that there's still corruption and local control. So when we get something like this, it shows the complexity of building the wells. So that gets into possible solutions. This is the AJOMA article. The previous one really did get into privatization. That's what AJOMA said as well. And he notes Taiwan at one time was a poor area, and then around World War II, and has become very wealthy. And the copycat idea that copycat success is for financial success. Local input. So this author, again, nearly everyone talks about local input, technology, the importance of technology as well. And the slide on the bottom there talks about Well Beyond, which is another organization that does have technology related to water wells. And they have water apps, and that data, you can get data on water usage, proper usage, other things like that. If the well isn't working quite right, there is a step-by-step platform that is a series of yes or no questions, so that the user can look at those questions and hopefully navigate through and get the well to work. And if not, they can almost basically an expert comes in, so they could set up basically a service request basically. So that's much more of a mutual relationship than simply going in and then leaving. Other possible solutions then is it gets into this idea of IPAR, which I mentioned before, and obviously what Rise Travel believes in as well. So volunteerism and much of this course then can apply to wells as well. So what's required then when we're talking about this, I started with helping in general and getting to Africa and then specifically into wells. The theme that we saw over and over is this idea of local input and a mindset of who the expert is. And that might be hard to change, to be honest. But first of all, having traveled through Africa, I see a lot of possibilities of Africa. Really impressed with the work ethic. A lot of the areas aren't mechanized, and the work ethic, we talk about labor, is still definitely there. And the land, a lot of the resources have been taken, but there's plenty of possibilities there. So I'm very optimistic it can happen and it can change. I think back, I'm old enough to remember where people were for fur, and now it's greatly discouraged. Or I remember the Soviet Union, and I always thought, well, when that would break apart, it would be very ugly. That there's no way this ends peacefully, and it ended rather peacefully. So it might seem daunting to have this mindset change, but it definitely is possible, and I think Rise Travel is part of that change. So thanks for joining us.
Are there any questions from the audience, from the folks online? Questions? I agree, Marianne, it's definitely a pressing issue as we all think about how we can give back to the communities that we travel in. Questions? One last round. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Joseph. We really appreciate your presentation. And
All right, thank you.
We love having you on our team. The Rise team is really wonderful. Biased, but. So our next presentation is Kelly Christian. And Kelly is a mother, a retired Army combat veteran, and a world traveler. And she is going to be talking about volunteerism. So, Kelly, you wanna There are your slides.
Good afternoon, my name is Kelly Christian. Today I will discuss volunteerism in Sub-Saharan Africa. And as we get to the first slide, I will say Joseph actually covered what I'm talking about. So there will be portions that I will move along a little bit faster since you already have some education.
Actually, these are new.
Oh, okay. And I have a new audience. That's wonderful. So how did we get to volunteerism? I looked at it through colonialism and colonization. And I'm looking at the lens from the Western European, the 19th and 20th century. And the first missionaries to come to the continent in Africa was 1490 Catholic missionaries. King, I like pronouncing his name, Nzinga, brought them because he wanted the missionaries to rebuild his capital of stone. And the Catholic missionaries ended up baptizing them. So we go from the Western European colonization to the missionaries to volunteerism, which took off in the 1990s. And I still to this day believe that volunteerism is rooted in colonialism. And one thing about myself, I do have American Red Cross Gold Service Award and Presidential Volunteer Service Award. So volunteering is dear to my heart. So I'm very passionate about the good and the bad. So volunteerism is a $3 billion a year industry, 30% of the volunteer workforce worldwide, which comes down to 32.7 million. That means 32.7 million people are volunteering and paying at the same time to go do a project. So they are for themselves at the end of the day because they're tourists. The neocolonialism practice of volunteerism is unsustainable. It's a forced gift, meaning like if I was to go, I'm the one who's dictated the project. Like you're my community and I'm not listening. And then I have this superiority complex and I don't want to know that you're educated. I'm just going to continue to do what I do because I signed up. I paid a travel organization to get this experience. And it weakens the local development. If I'm bringing skills or bodies, I'm taking away from the local workforce and their development of their skills. Political act of power and influence. So with the political act, I saw, make sure I want to get this right. It goes back to what I already said, and I want to reiterate. When you have someone who's paying a travel organization to go volunteer and have a tourist experience, you have the white superior complex. There's a balance of power and shift, so not the community, it's the tourist. Okay, so I looked at two for-profit volunteerism concepts. One is the orphanages, which Joseph touched about, and water supply points. And we both are good researchers because we use the same references. And this picture here, we talked about this in RISE. That's why I used it, and that will come in later on the literature. Volunteerism has helped create businesses out of orphanages. There has to be supply and demand. The supply is the volunteerism. The demand is children. And parents giving their children orphanages or denying that they're parents. And I actually saw this for the first time in 1995. I was in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, doing the Cuban and Haitian migrant mission. And at that point, the Haitians were going to be returned to Haiti. And so they disowned their children so that they would go to the orphanage camp. So that was my first experience of parents saying, I want a better life for you. I'm willing to sacrifice my love to help you prosper. However, orphanages are a business. You have the supply, you have the demand, and donations. And those donations and the monies keep the cycle going. So, okay.
We can go to the comments afterwards.
Yeah, do I X out of that? Okay. White Savior Complex is sending volunteers from rich nations to low-income countries by portraying volunteers as superheroes who will rescue the poor from their misery. Traditionally, it is a white middle-class student. So, same numbers about Joseph had.
I got back from class and he's laying in bed, and this is like moments before he like falls on his head.
You should be good now.
Okay. The lack of clean water supply points affect girls from attending school. The main reason is the time required to collect water, 25%. It takes 30 minutes per collection. So 25% of the females are taking 30 minutes per trip. And how many trips a day do you need to collect water? That is one of the main reasons that they're missing school. 50,000 water supply points are inoperable in rural Africa. And I made sure I put the 2009. So Jamie Skinner reported for the International Institute for Environment and Development, 50,000 water supply points were inoperable across rural Africa. This data point is still referenced in current literature today. So my point is, like, does that mean there's no more water supply points that have been built, or every single supply point that's been built is 100% since 2009? So our numbers aren't mathing up there. And then Cameroon. So there is a university that has a continuous volunteerism that goes to Cameroon and works on a water distribution system. And they are engineer students from the United States. However, they go with the White Savior Complex and they don't listen to their counterparts. And when their counterparts try to correct them, the college students are not listening. And so there's a great literature review that even though these are university students, engineers working with other engineers, the white students from the university still will not listen to the local experts. So the two for-profit was the orphanages and some of the water supply points. So two nonprofits. So we say nonprofits, and we're going to assume nonprofits are the good ones. That's not always true, and that's something that we learned in RISE. We have to look at every organization with a critical lens. So Habitat for Humanity, it was actually founded in 1965 on a communal farm in Georgia. And the communal farm dissented from another religious group because they wanted communal basis and they wanted equality. So Millward and Linda Fuller in 1965, they created Habitat for Humanity. And in 1973, let me move on here. In 1973, they went to Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. They worked for 3 years. In 1976, the first Habitat for Humanity houses were built in Africa. According to Habitat for Humanity, 6.9 million to drivers, hotels, restaurants, and gift shops that serve international volunteers when they visit. So it's a nonprofit, but it's still a volunteerism because you pay to go to Habitat for Humanity to the sub-Saharan Africa. Okay. Qualifications, criteria, and market rate costs for families. Just because you volunteer doesn't mean you're qualified. And so when you go and you're not qualified, the unskilled workers, they actually get injured and there have been deaths. And that's for the volunteer and it's also for the local community. And market rated cost. So in 2006, I did a term research paper on Habitat for Humanity. One thing I did not understand then is what there was another nonprofit organization in the continent of Africa that contracted for medication. And it was the same price no matter what country in Africa. It was actually 2 cents per pill for HIV treatment at that time. So that nonprofit was able to do it, but Habitat for Humanity charges market rate per company. I'm sorry, per country. When you bring your Western volunteers, for every 50, you're taking away 50 positions that the local community can learn and develop their skills. Okay. Now, this is where we go our critical lens. So a nonprofit volunteer, it is registered as a 501. It's out of Illinois. It has these great highlights. And once again, it is all work is done through the teaching of Lord Jesus Christ. That is on their website. However, what we call up here, to my right, your left, we call this poverty porn. It's when you take a picture to collect donations. You want to show the worst of the worst. So on their website, they have the poverty porn, and then they have, oh, you give us money, you have this wonderful classroom. In actuality, this is, I don't even think it's a company. I don't think it's a nonprofit. You can hardly find any information on it, but you can donate. But they have no statistics, nothing. And like I said, anytime you see poverty photos like this, they're a sign that it's probably not the best organization to donate. Okay, my 3 solutions: the decolonial theory, government policies, and technology, which we talked about well aware already. Okay. So decolonial theory is, it rather decenters the West and affirms the reemergence of reexistence and liberation of people dominated by the global Western project. So the key points, in order for us to learn decolonial theory, we have to realize where we started from in our country as what we were taught of colonialism. And Sustainable Development Goal number 4 says quality education. However, it does not talk about decolonial theory. And then since my time, oops, sorry, let me go back. Oh, there's our Well Aware. I did contact Well Aware in Austin. They were amazing. They got right back to me and they were able to give me their 2022 report, and they gave me permission to reference. Ripple effects, 525,000 lives saved. They feel that 64% of disease have been decreased by having clean water. And as we talked about, the females get to go to school. And the more education anyone has, the more economic opportunities they're going to have. And 58%, or sorry, 34% overall, and 58% for females. Okay, that was quick and ready for you.
Does anyone have any questions about volunteerism in the online, in person? Feel free to add your questions to the chat, unmute yourself, raise your hand.
Anyone asking questions in the chat?
Not at the moment. Questions?
Yes.
Would you recommend that the local governments have restrictions on these in some way?
Oh, yes, thank you. I did miss that slide, huh? Yes, I had global, continent, Africa, and state level. So global, it'd be United Nations would provide a policy of framework to go back to the Sustainable Development Goal number 4 to add decolonial theory. The continent of Africa, going back to that photo I brought up. The United States has the Federal Trade Commission that says you cannot take photos of children under 13 without the parents' permission and post it. I did not find a country in Africa that had that law. And going back to the original picture where the white lady is taking a selfie with the children, those parents don't speak the language, they're not giving permission. So on a continent level, there's alliances, nonprofit, non-governmental alliances that could create that policy. And then at a state level, each country must establish laws and regulations for themselves as the key actor other than the volunteerism company. So the state needs to be the main actor versus the volunteer company saying this is what we're gonna do. So thank you for that question.
There's a question in the chat. Unique topic, great job. What green flags can one look for when seeking a nonprofit to volunteer with international? Do you have any recommendations?
For me, I'm gonna email, I'm gonna ask questions. I wanna look at their financials. I wanna look at their impact report. I wanna see if there's scholarly articles about that organization. Because as I found the Feed Africa, there was a website that you could donate money and there was absolutely nothing else. So that gave me the red flag. There are great nonprofit organizations to volunteer with. Paying to volunteer is my concern.
Thank you.
Kelly,
Yes.
well done. That is great. And I just wanted to learn a little more about why you chose Well Aware to feature. Like, you know, what is this technology about? Because there was not a lot of like, I don't really understand like what they do exactly and how they are a company. No, sorry, they are a nonprofit based in Austin,
Yeah,
in Texas. So like, does that also kind of perpetuate or perpetrate the you know, the colonial?
It's Sarah Evans, she created Well Aware. For 2 years, she worked with local communities. They have 120 water distribution points. And what they created, Joseph touched on, is that Well Beyond app. So it was supposed to launch and then the pandemic happened. And so what they decided to do is provide that app to non-governmental organizations for a fee. And so local communities are learning how to use their water supply point, the technology, and they can troubleshoot.
Oh, so is that the Well Beyond?
Yes.
Technology.
Yeah, so
that
Well
Joseph-
Aware is the company, is the nonprofit, and Well Beyond is their app that they started during 2019-20.
Thank you. One of our guests in the chat said that she really appreciated your presentation and the solutions you're proposing. Unskilled Western volunteerism does so much harm in Central American countries, just like it does in Africa. And we need our tourism and government authorities to regulate these practices and encourage more transparency on all the foreign and local NGOs that provide these experiences. So not just an issue in the continent of Africa, but really all over. So thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
Great. So our next presentation will be from Zachary Parrott. And Zachary is originally from Detroit, Michigan, but he's currently calling Mexico City home. I'm really jealous. And he also was one of the members of our inaugural RISE experiential journey in 2022 to Guatemala. So he definitely knows a lot about RISE and what we do. So I'm going to let him take it away. His presentation is on dark tourism.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Like Jody was just saying, my name is Zachary. I previously traveled on that experiential journey to Guatemala, which was, I would say, life-changing for me. So I was very, very happy to do that. Today, I will be delving into the world of dark tourism and exploring its definition, motivations, and its ethical considerations. Let's see, I don't know why that went to the last slide. Sorry. Okay. Gotcha, now I know, okay. So to start, human history is marked by tragedy, cruelty, and death. And this fascination with the macabre has given rise to what we call dark tourism. People travel to locations that specifically featured human sacrifices in the Aztec Empire, gladiatorial games in the Roman Colosseum, or visited the memorial at Ground Zero. So for better or worse, we as people have been drawn to places tied to tragedy. So today we'll examine the impact of modern dark tourism and how we can foster a more ethical and mindful interaction with it. So let's begin by defining dark tourism. The term originated from a 1996 paper by Malcolm Foley and J. John Lennon, and they were examining the ethics of tourism surrounding the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So there was a proliferation of this newly defined tourism type as it was being developed in popularity. And over the years, dark tourism was, over the years, dark tourism was being deliberated in academic circles. And in 2022, it was described in a modern sense as the desire to learn and understand about sites associated with death and or heritage. So it's important to note that not all visitors to these sites are visiting for those reasons, as not all visitors even perceive a site as intrinsically dark. But that doesn't mean we should ignore these mixed appeal sites. Think about most museums around the world. These will feature stories about people warring to conquer or to liberate, oppression, and even the Natural History Museum will have skeletal remains of animals. And we can also look to the Colosseum or the pyramids, for example. While some see wonders of the world, Goliaths of the cities that they are visiting, and past civilizations, pictured in countless textbooks, movies, TV shows, others are drawn to the darker history within. As previously stated, the Colosseum was an execution ground, and the pyramids contain or used to contain human remains of pharaohs and their retainers. We want to distinguish visitors interested in a site's dark past from those with different motivations, and we'll look at several sites that have this mixed background. So first off is Kolmanskap. This is a site that my partner and I visited in 2021. And Kolmanskap is an abandoned mining town in modern-day Namibia that was popular in the early 20th century under colonial rule from Germany and later England. The ghost town has recently had a spike in popularity due to a Tame Impala album cover being shot there. My partner and I visited for the allure of seeing a sand-swept ghost town and took a tour that explained the buildup, heyday, and abandonment of the town itself. The guide that we were with was quick to note all of the amenities that the town had featured, like an ice maker, a meeting hall that hosted traveling entertainment companies, and even a morning trolley that would serve the town with fresh lemonade on a daily basis. This was all done in the scope that not 500 yards away sat the living quarters for the mine's laborers. And this was a sharp contrast to the sprawling, luxurious town where over 200 people were living in a single room barracks and were treated to inhumane practices akin to slavery, but explained as indentured servitude. We left with a feeling that the colonial practices were still being whitewashed, even from the local population itself, with the allure that a place like that is more of a piece of unique and fun history than it is of historical oppression of the native population. Another site that my partner and I have been to recently, as it's near Mexico City, is Teotihuacan. It's an archaeological site about an hour or so outside of Mexico City. And historically, it was a city that housed the Mexican people as well as the Aztecs as they grew their empire. The site's significant features are the Temple of the Moon and the Sun that dominate the local landscape. And until recently, travelers were able to walk the height of the temples to view the valley below for a great view. The building techniques and restoration efforts were noted by our guide, but they also didn't shy away from the human sacrifices practiced there. They explained how both slaves, people viewed as holy, were executed at the site, and their remains are still buried within the walls and the foundations of the pyramids themselves. Most people we noted were traveling to the site for the cultural aspect that the temples and the city advertised, not the fact that human sacrifices were practiced there and so were still there. And the last site here is the Monument of Discovery. So this is located outside of Lisbon, Portugal, and commemorates Portugal's once proud sailing and nautical history. You can see that the people on the monument depicted are positioned to look outward towards the sea as a symbol of exploration and endeavor that helped Portugal rise and create a global trade system. This was also described to us by a local as a testament to the colonization of the New World and global South by European powers, as this was the dawn of exploration for some and the dawn of oppression for others. In most travel blogs, you'll see the monument is mentioned as something to do in Lisbon on a weekend, but my partner and I both felt that having a standing monument to the brutal oppression of millions was a bit ironic from a country that was the last European country to hold on to its colonies. That being said, context is key in evaluating the ethics behind dark tourism. Let's compare Auschwitz with the Jeffrey Dahmer tours in Milwaukee. Auschwitz humanizes victims, serving as an educational tool and as a reminder for locals and people across the world about the history that still impacts them today. And we'll touch more on that later too. Conversely, serial killer tours often lack the same context and respect. And this potentially causes harm to the families and the communities associated with the victims by glamorizing the killer and their actions. And this context is key to evaluate the impact that dark tourists have on the places they travel, as well as how the site will actually impact them and their understanding of the events that occurred there. In a poll of 900 Americans, 52% had traveled to dark locations for educational purposes, with other reasons being to pay tribute or to travel to places that had some sort of historical significance. Within the context scope of dark tourism, it should be noted that the people traveling to sites with dark pasts had prior knowledge of that site's significance. So basically, this poll was pulled from dark tourists who had already kind of been exposed to this kind of context. And next, I'd like to cover the power dynamics of dark tourists and how they relate to the RISE flagship course. The power dynamics in dark tourism are subtle. Some visitors seek education and understanding. Others will travel for more heritage-based tourism. In a perfect world, everybody traveling to these sites will have thought about the context beforehand and visit in a respectful manner. But for either of those and many other reasons, there still remains the concept that people travel to these locations with the idea that they are learning, they are doing it the right way in their own mind. But as you can see from the slide, from that same poll of 900 Americans, this is for people who essentially don't agree with dark tourism. They don't like the dynamic that it creates for several reasons. And it's important to understand that the local population who are connected to the dark tourist site may still feel like their culture is being exploited, and their main reason or their main concern is for the sites to live on as a reminder for their children and their own cultural historical significance, and not for tourists to come and visit. And I'll call this a mini case study, but I'd like to cover one of dark tourism's most prolific sites. Auschwitz is one of the most popular, if not the most popular, dark tourism sites in the world. The site's significance is, of course, related to the 1.1 million people who died there, and it has now become a symbol of the Holocaust perpetrated in the 30s and 40s as a whole. Over time, the site has been improved to create a coexisting museum, as well as becoming a protected zone as a UNESCO heritage site. And different countries have even contributed their own exhibits to symbolize their own citizens that perished within the scope of the Holocaust as a whole. With this growth, the site has become more and more prevalent, with 2.32 million visitors in 2019. And as that relates to mass tourism, basically within the dark tourism spectrum, Auschwitz has its fair share of problems. Symbolic Auschwitz also has a role to play in creating visitor expectations, as many who embark on a visit do so with the aim of ticking off the most paradigmatic aspects of the site, including the containers of hair and shoes that feature in the permanent exhibition. Another common picture being the railway leading into the camp. And ticking off or bucket list items, as previously mentioned today, on a checklist at any kind of site should never be an objective in travel. It defeats the purpose of any exchange of ideas or education that one can find while traveling. But ideally, A dark tourist is traveling with the desire and interest in cultural heritage, learning, education, and understanding about what happened at that site. There have been efforts from management to combat this with trips for teenagers organized by the Holocaust Education Trust. And these operate with a day visit to the site, coupled with pre and post excursion workshops that help provide context. Programs like this, however, are on a small scale, and for most sites, we must still rely on people's own pre-education and motives when visiting to ensure the places that they're visiting are respected as the owners would like them to be respected. And again, within the scope of RISE's course, photography within Auschwitz and dark sites poses challenges. In Auschwitz, there are no regulations against photography, and thus social media's influence has led to inappropriate photos, even prompting the institution itself to publicly denounce such behavior on the poster's social media accounts. It has spawned numerous articles about the practices and techniques of taking pictures while there, which has actually helped shine a light on common ethical photography practices that can be applied to other dark tourism sites, and how these practices must be emphasized to maintain the solemn nature of these locations. So I have a few questions up here. These are for basically people to reflect on as they've traveled to similar places or just in general. But in my mind, dark tourism has the potential to offer profound insights as it allows us to learn from different cultures' histories and how these events are still affecting people today. It's important to note that these dark travelers practice ethical travel in regards to their own biases when traveling and treat each place with respect, not only for the people who currently choose these places as home, but also for the victims of the travesties that occurred there. There are takeaways from the concept's most iconic site in Auschwitz that can be applied elsewhere, such as the photography practices, the mass tourism practices, but these are still not perfected. They're very hard to enforce, and at this point, they're still on a small scale. We may never be able to have people completely educate themselves on where they are traveling to or stop them from taking selfies, but we can still stay mindful when we travel ourselves. And dark tourism does have a place within our wider scope of ethical travel and will remain a reason why people travel in and of itself. So in my mind, it's better to identify what dark tourism itself is and be able to work on creating a more inclusive experience for the people that we visit and create a long-lasting impact for those who travel. This part's the Q&A. I'm going to leave those questions up there just because I think they're very good. But that wraps it up.
Tanner gets us started. He has a resource in the link to share with you that you might be interested in. Consuming dark sites via street art murals at Chernobyl. That is really interesting. Does anyone have any questions for Zach about dark tourism? Again, unmute yourself, put it in the chat, raise your hand in person. Yep.
This might be out of scope because it seems like your focus is more on the ethical travelers themselves, but when it comes to somebody who's coming in because, I don't know, it's on the tourist map, or maybe they don't have a specific care of this framework, is there anything the sites in and of themselves can do, some sort of blueprint, bullet point, roadmap, to have them be further engaged in a way beyond just kind of bucket list mentality?
Yeah, that's a great question. I missed the first part, but I think you were asking about just places that could maybe provide like a framework prior to travelers coming or while they're there. So the
first part was basically your focus, I think, is on people who want to be mindful. I'm wondering from the perspective of the sites, if there's anything they can do to engage with people who are not going to be doing this anticipatory work.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that I kind of was looking at my research and have experienced myself was having a tour guide. And I think that really helps people engage in the correct kind of context. When traveling somewhere, that could be the guide, basically you getting the guide beforehand, them maybe sending you materials for you to look at on your own. And I think that will be relatively low cost, I'd say. There's not much infrastructure. You don't need to build buildings or anything like that. It's just the relationship that you'd have with the person showing. year round. But I do think that part of that infrastructure actually does need to include training for the guides themselves. As I mentioned on the Coleman's-Scott tour that my partner and I took, our guide, I wouldn't have recommended them for anybody else. They kind of skimmed over the whole partial slavery that was being committed there. So there needs to be some sort of training specifically to international tourists to provide the correct context. But I think you're right. There can be a framework for a lot of these places. You'll also have places like the Coliseum or these mixed sites where, maybe people aren't interested in that, but they still need to be exposed to it. But it depends on each site. That's a good question.
What?
Yeah, thank you, Zach. That was a great presentation. I don't know if this is a question so much as a comment, maybe both. But I guess building off of what Ronnie just said, if we say that, there's a significant amount of the onus of doing this responsibly that should fall on the operator of said site or the guides or the destination, whatever it may be, would it not be, would the most responsible approach perhaps be that you welcome folks who perhaps don't have mindful practices in mind, right? Because if the idea is to educate them, I see the Dia de los Muertos picture up there, right? If the idea is to educate people that may not show respect to it, what better way to educate them than to get them to participate and show up? So it was just this weird, like, roundabout way of thinking about this that I was thinking about the whole time. Yeah.
No, that's a great comment. And I mean, I'll point back to Auschwitz. I don't think the management, because it's like a museum as well, but I don't think they want to turn anyone away from coming to visit these sites, right? They want people to come in and learn. It's just providing that context is very important, of course, right? But I completely agree that should be an open arms. And I'm not saying dark tourism is bad in any way. It is more of just say, hey, this is what it is. We can do it more ethically and put these frameworks in place to have everybody experience it. I'm going to say the right way, but just in more context. That's a great comment, because I do think it needs to be an open thing, an open experience for everybody.
Hey, Zach, thank you so much for your presentation. Well done. This is a very interesting topic. And as a matter of fact, RISE has been wanting to create a course on the ethics of dark tourism. Maybe I will get you to participate and get involved in that project. So thank you so much. I do have one question and a recommendation. So just talking about the recommendation first, because that's short. Not sure if you're aware of the Institute for Dark Tourism Research. They are located, I think they're housed at the University of Central Lancashire, and they have a wealth of resources on this topic. So definitely look it up. And my question is, are you aware of any efforts on the part of the governments or destination management organizations to actually divert or like redirect the tourist traffic to, like, there's not just Auschwitz or Dachau, there are like so many concentration camps in Europe, right? And so these are branded as the go-to sites. And has there been an effort to actually redirect the tourism traffic to those less visited sites? Because now the problem here is not just the effect or like the psychological effect that disrespectful tourists or uneducated tourists or uninformed tourists have on the local communities who are associated with the victims. It's also the impact of over-tourism at these sites, right? Dachau and Auschwitz. So are you aware of any efforts on the part of the governments or destination management organizations to do that?
That's a great question, great comment. So within my research of Auschwitz, the only thing that I could find about the government essentially stepping in would be to actually change more of the scope of Auschwitz itself to more of the Polish citizens. that were executed though, or imprisoned there. To build on that, so I guess to answer that directly, not really. But I do agree that they could basically spread more of the tourism, especially in this case where it's concentration camps. Those sites are, stable; they're not going anywhere. I think they could do more for that, but I didn't find anything in particular, other than just trying to gear it more towards the Polish citizens. But I did also see that because there is so many people coming through, there has been degradation of some of the sites themselves, with just so many people coming through, because the museums are built into the old buildings that were still built there in the 40s.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach. This was a really wonderful presentation. There's an interesting conversation happening in the chat. For those of you who are online, I encourage you to keep reading along. And I'm going to take this opportunity to make a really quick plug that if you're interested in the topics you're learning about today, a few things you can do to continue the conversation. If you haven't already, sign up for the flagship program. You can also connect with us on Instagram and on LinkedIn. The RISE website also has some interesting short courses you can get involved in. So we love all of the interest and the conversation, and we'd really love to keep it going. And with that, I'm going to move on to our next presenter. Jillian Spratt is a sustainability and communications professional with a background in corporate social responsibility, environmental, social, and government strategy, and impact consulting. And she is going to be talking about sustainable tourism certification schemes and analysis of the perception, benefits, and drawbacks.
Awesome. Thank you, Jody. Am I sharing okay?
Not yet.
Let's see. That should do it. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Jody. I wanted to do a deep dive into the world of sustainable travel certification because as a sustainability professional and an everyday consumer, I'm always keeping my eye out for third-party verification. And so I wanted to understand how the perception and adoption of certification differs around the world, identify gaps in those schemes, and then offer suggested improvements. So as a brief history, Green Globe is one of the most widely recognized global tourism certifications, which has roots dating back to the 1992 United Nations Earth Summit. 10 years later, in 2002, we saw the first International Year of Ecotourism, which led to an uptake of ecotourism certifications. And in the absence of effective legal regulation, these schemes sort of filled that space as a self-regulating and market-based solution that could enable positive environmental, social, and economic outcomes. Another decade later, the Global Sustainable Tourism Council released the world's baseline standards for tourism destination management. So the use case for certification has been growing, and their intention appears clear. They offer quick sense-making within a very nuanced and complex industry, but there are also less considered drawbacks and inequities that actually dilute their usefulness and the intended outcomes. We'll unpack all of the above. First, I want to ground us in why perception of certification matters. 74% of US consumers said they care about the environmental impact of their purchases, with 79% looking for an easier way to identify companies that are offering a green alternative. Everyday consumers, though, don't really have the time, the expertise, the resources to vet sustainability claims. So we instill that trust in third-party assurances, trusting that they've done the heavy lifting for us. And that trust is directly related to how a given certification is perceived. Another study found that access to reliable sustainability information about a destination is one of the most significant factors in influencing what's called sustainable travel habits. And tourists who develop sustainable travel habits will continue to consider sustainability in their future travel decisions. So That's some significant behavior change fueled by information that's perceived to be reliable. And I say perceived because what's considered reliable will not only vary across consumers, but access to reliable information also depends on whether tourism operators have the knowledge, the resources, and the ability to accurately associate cost savings and increased demand with their sustainability efforts. Another aspect influencing perception that I want to call out is travel publications. So whether this is, a market research paper on top countries for sustainable tourism or a Forbes article on, must-see cities for the low-impact traveler, all of these lists and rankers have the power to influence and sometimes urge travelers toward certain places. On the one hand, these resources help garner international support for certified options. It sends a unified message to the industry that travelers will prioritize engaging with and spending money in places that are capable of these types of offerings. But on the other hand, using this kind of criteria to boycott places that are farther behind in sustainable development means slower demand creation and perpetuating a systemic barrier where those without sufficient resources remain marginalized in the market. So to understand how the broader industry can equalize those benefits while also minimizing harm, there has to be greater awareness on the benefits and the drawbacks that are offered. So in theory, third-party verification allows consumers to differentiate among goods and services in relation to their environmental and social attributes. And this ability to differentiate facilitates price premiums, it expands market access for certified products. For consumers, it helps them make informed choices. As I mentioned, I look for them myself. They help customers minimize their own negative impacts. They drive demand for certified products. For providers, it helps them improve their environmental and social performance, stay competitive, enhance their reputation with a conscious consumer base, and it helps them invest in further innovations, having that business case. And then for host countries, certification helps them protect their natural and cultural assets, empower their communities, and support policy and planning for new developments. So really what this comes down to is that the value of certification is only offered when enough consumers can recognize it. I want to move into some deeper challenges, starting with a case study from Hong Kong that highlights the notion that one size does not fit all. In Hong Kong, there's no national certification standard to adopt, meaning organizations are able to structure their own scheme. And even though interviewed stakeholders conceptually agreed with establishing a standard, there were a ton of noted barriers. How are we going to align with national parameters at a local level? Who is taking ownership to adopt, communicate, monitor local adherence? Or things like we can't afford to certify because our market size can't support its maintenance. So what does this mean? It means that even if a national standard were to exist, they failed to see how it would be relevant for them locally, considering their regional nuance, which means that the burden to create the appropriate scheme falls to local organizations. And that's okay, but this can lead to a scenario in which there's either too many business-specific schemes that oversaturate and sort of fracture otherwise collective impact, or we have too many businesses that are discouraged from certifying altogether, which is what we see here. One of the largest theoretical concerns with modern certification schemes is that the intended outcomes are often based in Western ideals of what good travel and stewardship looks like. There are attempts at global governance of ethical travel. The United Nations Tourism Bill of Rights and Global Code of Ethics are some examples. But as we know from our coursework, ethics are personal, they're contextual, they're fluid, yet it's very common for conversations on universal well-being to be grounded in realities and definitions from the global north, which are historically embedded in modernity, imperialism, and colonialism. So when it comes to defining sustainable tourism success factors, developed countries orient more towards successful capital markets versus the developing world orients toward hyper-local political and social concerns. Things like self-determination, autonomy from oppressive regimes, capacity building. And this next study out of Tanzania notes how attempts to implement local conservation measures are often rooted in colonization. And this study shows that as mass tourism increased in remote areas, tourists still desired, the comfort of catered tours and familiar accommodation. So over time, there were concerns on the impact that this would have on African rainforests. So this led to attempts to impose Western conservation techniques, which relied on modern ideologies, modern technologies, and racial interpretations. For indigenous communities, nature is viewed as having intrinsic value and is stewarded as a reciprocal practice of gratitude with the land. So to alter the way that the land has historically been managed is to erase existing value and impose new value that caters to visitors. And one thing I want to point out here is that locals noted that seizing land for conservation purposes differs little in practice and symbolism from the initial loss of the same lands to European powers. All of that to say, when the way we measure success is anchored in Western ideals, it disproportionately allows those with power to remain the moral arbiters of what sustainable tourism means. Conservation schemes require investment, certainly in terms of time, but also in terms of upfront capital, which means small and medium-sized businesses can experience a higher degree of difficulty. The process can be quite costly, lengthy, demanding, and complex. And so investing in certification is only feasible when the projected income or cost savings exceed the cost to invest. And we see from this case study that visitors to Australia's wet tropics, which is a World Heritage Site with year-round access and typically large concentrations of tourists, this shows that certified operators were preferred over non-certified. But when asked their willingness to pay a premium for that assurance, support kind of began to taper. And with every price scenario presented in the study, the percentage of visitors not willing to pay a premium exceeded the percentage price increase. So this suggests that a price rise would not only make certified options less accessible for visitors and impact overall revenue for the operator, but if a price increase deters a majority of visiting tourists, the same would likely hold true for local and indigenous residents. The population that were most willing to pay were young, educated, and affluent women, 4 different criteria. And so when we cater to visitors of a certain identity and narrow that pool of access, it creates a skewed narrative about who gets to travel and how a place should be experienced. Our next study is out of Scandinavia, and it looks at certification and behavior change. So some useful context here is that entities that are meeting minimum standards disproportionately choose to participate in getting certified, and those that are exceeding minimum standards actually tend to opt out. The first being a quick win mentality, and the second being a why bother mentality. Other helpful context is that Scandinavian culture embodies the philosophy of friluftsliv, which is a lifestyle that embraces time spent outdoors, undisturbed nature, time spent outside and outdoor recreation. So there's this cultural self-image of being sustainable by nature. And this identity came through when local businesses were explaining why they choose not to certify. They viewed certification as administrative, redundant, this stance of, we have our own approach. We know what we're doing. We do this and more. We don't need paperwork to show it. So in a place where sustainability is inherently connected to quality of life, the percentage of certified companies might actually be a pretty unreliable metric of environmental awareness and engagement. So moving to some suggestions. Improvements to the world of sustainable travel certification need to be just as multifaceted as the issues they seek to address. Big picture, I think this starts with a reorientation towards the spiritual domain of sustainability, an acknowledgement of our transcendent connectedness that addresses the why of sustainability over the how. And this type of conscious shift takes time, but it does provide a level of understanding that's required for more tactical improvements that are helpful. So starting with decolonizing certification metrics, certifying agencies must consider if, where, when points of conformity are helpful versus where to grant flexibility to honor and acknowledge local customs, cultural, political, religious considerations. Justice and peace must be core pillars of sustainable tourism. Specifically, feminist researchers discuss an ethic of care, which addresses particular contextualized differences rather than universal generalized theories of justice. Schemes should always seek to intimately incorporate systems thinking in its criteria, aspects that support self-sufficiency and self-determination, build solidarity between visitors and those visited, promote relationships based on understanding, respect, and equity, and allow for a moldability with how sustainability is interpreted. In terms of sensible process improvements, explore the benefits of a phased approach to certification. Utilizing distinct tiers or phases could actually help entities prioritize their approach, improve a subset of their operations, and strategically utilize time, labor, and financial resources. It might also encourage a more continuous improvement mindset than an all or nothing approach in which, an entity has either achieved certification or has not. Certification schemes should always utilize independent verification. Verifiers should be local or regional representatives who have the context that's required to assess and assign an appropriate outcome. And there must be culturally appropriate mechanisms for local involvement in tourism planning, development, decision-making, and feedback loops. And finally, because the adoption and outcomes of certification are influenced by perception, it's key to adopt communication tactics that set context and translate impact into an easy-to-understand narrative. Many attributes measured by certification are invisible to travelers, right? So it's up to certification adopters to understand the commitments, the trade-offs, and to communicate that progress in a way that actively works against greenwashing. For travelers, asking questions about, an organization's certification status lets adopters know what their stakeholders' priorities are when determining where to travel. Consider what resources are being leveraged to inform that choice and who those resources are speaking to. Travelers should ask who benefits from this choice and align their travel behavior with their values, while also understanding that seeing those values materialize in their experiences may also require increased costs, flexibility, and perhaps advocacy. So I wanted to end with some closing thoughts. This analysis is not meant to discourage the belief in or adoption of certification, nor dismiss the many efforts undertaken by those who have certified. Sustainable tourism schemes are just sort of still in their infancy, and they're not perfect solutions to sustainable travel. Being critical about their usefulness and posing difficult questions, even if the answers remain unclear, forces us to acknowledge these gaps and strive for better outcomes. I think these findings can inspire travelers to think beyond the binary of certified or uncertified, and also encourage those who are pursuing certification to assess its value through the right lens. Enhancing these schemes through a systems thinking and anti-oppression lens will move us toward a state where the anticipated outcome actually matches the intention behind certification. And, for me, this is a state where travelers who leverage their trust in their decision-making can feel grounded in that choice. Adopters who invested resources in certification can trust that those efforts will pay dividends. And for host countries that are involuntarily ranked against each other are not disadvantaged in the tourism market. That is what I have for you today. A deep thank you for the time and the platform.
We got a few minutes for questions. There are a couple of comments talking about how great it is that you mentioned the Western centric character of a lot of tourism discourse. So thank you for acknowledging that and for incorporating multiple perspectives for theoretical and practical change. So what questions do we have for Jillian? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
just speak up a little bit.
Okay. What other methods would you suggest to differentiate between businesses that want to be sustainable and show their customers that are sustainable other than certifications?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is something that Zach touched on, which is context is everything. There's studies that show, you know, there's greater reception and trust in organizations that are transparent about their lack of progress, and contextualizing that. You know, I'd rather engage in an organization that is working towards doing less harm as opposed to just focusing on doing the most good. You know, we have to honor that journey, knowing that people are entering in on different ground floors of that. So I would say, you know, in vetting these organizations, maybe that don't have certifications, understanding what context and what level of transparency they are offering, and also asking questions, right? Not being afraid to engage and ask questions. There are, you know, other certifications outside of what's considered ecotourism certifications that perhaps might be helpful to look at, that are quite, you know, recognizable and intersectional, B Corp being a good example. So I would say look for that context and transparency over, you know, just explicit verification without additional information and context.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions for Julie before we move? Yeah,
Quick comment. I just really want to congratulate you, Jillian. It's just, you know, stellar presentation. I really love the capsule project and the critical eyes that you are using to looking at like sustainable, well, just sustainability, the sustainability movement itself and how to decolonize it. So you talk about like, you know, how this movement actually like impose Western values and universality and you know, and bring this colonial mindset to you know, different places of the world. And I just like really appreciate it. And I think, you know, we're gonna collaborate on another ebook probably on decolonizing tourism, you know, for businesses. That's gonna be our next project.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lindsay.
So our next presenter is Serena Manna. Serena loves small business development and understanding how messaging aligns with business practices. And her presentation is titled Navigating Economic Growth and Community Development Through Tourism in Rhode Island.
Yeah. Hi. Okay. Yeah. I feel like we should move forward. Okay, your front row audience, get comfortable. Everybody's having a good day. Awesome. So when I first submitted this paper at Arise, it was inclusive tourism development, but I think in presentation form, it became more of like how to navigate economic growth and community development through tourism in Rhode Island, because they can have like conflicting goals at times, economic growth and community development. So I started this project really because I was curious about how places develop, really down to like the nitty gritty of who's involved, and also like who is responsible for different development projects as well. And I did the tough work of like sifting through news articles, government papers, press releases to find like who, why, and how these areas develop and who's included in that process. You say illustrated, did you draw that? Yeah. Oh my God, that's so cool. Yes, there's a couple of illustrations through this. When I'm taking like notes, it's helpful for me to synthesize it better if I do it. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So yeah, I'm gonna basically go through like the contrasting themes that I found in this research, and then just give you like a context of like the area of interest, which is Rhode Island's tourism. Talk about these like funding models that I was looking into, the market considerations of development and like place-based development, and then bring it back to this inclusive type of tourism development with considering residents versus tourists. So the challenges that I find, like these contrasting themes between economic growth and community development, we're developing funding models, and by we, I mean the industry, but also government sectors, public sectors, private. And then you also have market considerations and development projects, which I'll talk more about in the presentation, especially between economic and tourism Tourism is an emerging market, so it's interesting to see how more projects might consider like the cultural components or arts and culture and tourism in a specific development project, and I'll share more about that. And then the community impact. So we have development, and we often see in tourism, it could be for tourists as the audience or also for residents, and there's an opportunity to combine both. So I gave a snapshot of basically Rhode Island's tourism, and I guess I'll talk about the who first. So you have our DMO is Providence Warwick Convention Visitors Bureau. Well, we have a couple, like Rhode Island Commerce Corporation is, they fund all of our like Visit Rhode Island campaigns, as well as the Providence Arts, Culture, and Tourism. So they're responsible for funding like more of these localized grant projects. And then also we have RISCA, Rhode Island Council of the Arts, and then Providence Tourism Improvement District is one of the main new initiatives that I'll talk about later in the slides, but it's a new funding model that Providence Warwick Conventions Visitors Bureau really pushed for. There were a lot of interesting pieces about the snapshot that I took a look at, and I'll just highlight a couple. So it was interesting to me that the food and beverage was the top category for visitor spending. And it's also the top industry for employment in the visitor industry. So the other part of that is that the lowest wages were paid in accommodation and food services, which I thought was also very interesting. And then followed by the arts, entertainment, and recreation. So that, and then also retail trade. So the interesting piece about that and how I highlighted in this slide here is like when we're developing for residents versus tourists, typically residents are employed in Rhode Island. So it's really interesting to kind of see that, yes, there's this booming industry, but are the people that are supporting it being paid? This was one of the pieces that I had mapped out. For those who are here can see it looks, the whole picture kind of looks like this. But basically when I considered the who, it's the local residents, the yellow ring are the business owners, nonprofits, co-ops, and coalitions. Then the state in the blue, the city in green, and federal is at the outer ring in orange. And basically what I think like one of my biggest takeaways was learning about these quasi-public agencies. I think in this whole program in general, you're like really trying to understand and map out what's public, what's private, who funds what. It gets really murky and it's confusing to understand like and track down where this resources come from and who's in charge of them. I was pleased to learn that in Rhode Island, we do have a 27 member economic development steering committee, which is composed of like public, private, and nonprofit sectors. And this is a new initiative. So they were working on the 2023 plan. It's all public information also. And then that through this plan, like Rhode Island Commerce will initiate the incentives, grants, and tax credits to like better streamline business support. And a lot of those businesses are operating in the tourism industry, either indirectly or directly. And yeah, I think it was also really interesting to see like the population of different cities versus how much was allocated to their growth. And I think the one that I found the most interesting was that 33 million went to Newport. So one of the lower ends of the major cities, and there's 27,000 people typically year round. But it can get up to upwards of 100,000 people in the summer or those peak tourism. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Oh, and the last point about this piece is that when I'm talking about like how Rhode Island Commerce really initiates like these projects and these grants and bringing it all back to like development, I was I was learning about like business improvement districts, and I was like, okay, so how is that tied to tourism? And that's how I found about the tourism improvement district that the Warwick or Providence Warwick Convention Visitors Bureau pushed for. So I separated the two of them, and I wish I had a map, but there's mainly three right now in Rhode Island. And so it's the Providence Innovation Design District, which we're right near. So if you're seeing a lot of development near us, it's a lot of hotels that are going to support this like innovation and design. It used to be the jewelry district, so you can kind of see how like shifts are happening from a type of from one industry to another. So what you had was like jewelry and manufacturing is now this like innovation and design district, and I can attest to it because my office that I work at is there. And I work at a place that does small business development. And then Quonset, which I don't know a lot about, is driving manufacturer growth. I didn't look deeply into that one. And then this content thread district was actually the most interesting to me because it's in Pawtucket. And it's also known as like transient orientated district because it's going to be like the connector between New York, Pawtucket, and Boston. So yes, that was one thing. And there's facts there for people to see like when these types of development initiatives started. This one was in the UK in 2004, and then Tourism Improvement District started in 1989 in West Hollywood. There's 130 in the US, and I think it's on the next slide, but there's like an advisory group that helps like facilitate this process, and they're the ones that specifically facilitated the Team ID here in Rhode Island. So yeah, this is a little bit more in depth to like Rhode Island specific, the tourism improvement districts. This is how they work. Their funding model that basically takes the hotel tax, gives it to the city of Providence, or the city of Providence takes it. And then the DMO specific, this is the one that manages our funding. It's restricted to like marketing activity. So the interesting thing is that this is such a new initiative. It started in 2002 in response to a loss of 78 million in direct spending revenue from COVID, that I really couldn't find a lot on how these funds are going to be like facilitated and pushed towards what kinds of projects. I think like the Visit Rhode Island website looks wonderful, and I see a lot of different types of like campaigns going to highlight like local food and beverage and arts and culture. So I'm curious to see what they'll do with it. But the project really is about how we can get resident voices involved in that type of activity. Okay, and that's the Civitas. I recommend taking a look at them. They're the ones that guide these like most tourism independent districts, tourism improvement districts. And then this was just, so I just showed you the specific one for tourism improvement districts, and this is more what like a business improvement district looks like. It's very development focused. This again is the one in Pawtucket that I mentioned. So yeah, it just seems a little bit disconnected. Like if I was the common folk, which I am, I just wouldn't know my place in this type of development, even if I'm curious. Thank you. And some of the development projects that I think were really exciting and worked really well. I looked at two in Providence. One of them is 50 Sims. It's live, it's thriving, it's well. If you go to the farmer's market on Saturdays, it's in the Orange Building, Farm Fresh, Rhode Island. And it was basically part of this development project to revive an area. There are challenges with this towards gentrification, of course. But I think the thing about this development group specifically is that they do try and work with the community. And then there was a different one that was also run by the same developer, which many of you have probably heard about this project. It's this crazy looking castle that was built in, I think, like probably the early 1900s. Lots and lots of like community input went into it, but eventually like the project got pretty botched, mismanaged, and is a space right now that works as a warming center in the winters for people who do not have homes. Okay, and then Yeah, so this was basically a summary of like those two projects that I had looked at separately. So both use community engagement. I talked about the two groups that they use. I shared the outcome. One became an opportunity to participate in the maker economy. So that's like that market consideration. And then the other one is still a multi-use space, but not really as like commercial as they wanted. Oh, thank you, Tanner. So yeah, that was kind of the highlight of that. It was seeing how many different opinions were managed. And these are my observations about like community development. I find that like tourism is still this like emerging field. We're still trying to figure out how to trust funding to develop, and whether it goes to residents or tourist interests. This is a prime example. This article came out like yesterday about like if this building is going to become a boutique hotel or housing, and if it's going to be affordable housing. Infrastructure debates, which this article highlights, and then like resource management, which is you still have these like arts and culture tourism grants going out, but sometimes they might not consider a certain type of music group or certain type of concert. So it can be missing an emphasis for historically excluded initiatives. These are things that are working. Small business and nonprofit development, I think, is really thriving. I work in it and I've seen it work well. I've also seen challenges, but there is definitely resources going towards that. Yeah, and I think again, like tourism is a tool to preserve historically excluded arts, culture, and entertainment. This is an excellent organization called PVD World Music. And for the solution that I came up with, it was just called Start Here Rhode Island. It was an initiative to basically work with that pool of funding from the TID to get more community input involved. Maybe set up like these colorful mailboxes for letters only, because I kind of thought of potential like destruction to government property. But I think if it was like funded by the TID, but provided by like an arts nonprofit, so it looked like a local initiative, it could work better. But actually like the nonprofit was running it, so they had more agency and the voices and the audience. Yeah, and it would be a task force that meets monthly and really prioritizes like cultural programming, natural resource preservation, and language inclusivity.
Does anyone have any questions for Serena, either online? There's a suggestion, if you don't work with Bob Billington, I can connect you with the Blackstone Valley Tourism Council.
Oh, thank you.
Tanner.
I would love that connection, Tanner. Thank you.
We can also.
If I wanna.
You know, Bob?
I didn't, read all this in class because he teaches undergrad.
He's actually here on Wednesday nights, he's teaching.
Really? I thought he was here right now.
He's taken the destination and just made it fantastic.
Really? Okay,
He's a
good.
Coast Guard veteran.
He's-
He's a Coast Guard veteran.
Yeah, I am.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? We've got time for another question or two. Kristen said she loves residents first. You can't have a thriving community if the residents aren't thriving. I totally agree with that.
Thank you.
Do we have any other last questions for Serena? All right, thank you so much. So, thank you everyone for joining us today. We have our last presentation, and Selma Barada is a native of Morocco, and she graduated from Johnson & Wales University with a bachelor's degree in business and a master's in sustainable tourism. Her presentation is titled How to Perpetuate the Artisans' Culture in Morocco and Ensure Their Direct Profitability. So Selma, as soon as you're ready.
For the artisans of Morocco. So how to perpetuate the artisans' culture in Morocco and ensure their direct profitability. So this is the structure of my capstone project. So first we're going to start with an overview of Morocco, then a background and historical background about the artisans' culture and the artisans' culture, and then challenges and conflicts that they're suffering from, existing solutions, and recommended solutions. So Morocco is located in Northern Africa. This is a map of Morocco. There is 4 spoken languages. So Darija, which comes from the Arabic, Berber is an umbrella language. There is many different dialects depending on which region you come from. And then French and Spanish, because Morocco was colonized by both France in central Morocco and Spain in the northern and southern Morocco. The population of Morocco is 35 million people. Currency is the dirham. Morocco is a Muslim country with some Jewish community and history and culture as well. And the environment of Morocco is mild to semi-tropical. So some background about the artisans' culture. So artisans, they usually sell their products in souks, which are outdoor markets. They are either permanent or ephemeral. So permanent would be, for example, like Medina. In Marrakesh, they have the Medina of Marrakesh or the Medina of Rabat. They're usually in bigger cities. And ephemeral would be another souk that would take place in one specific day or one specific day of the week or of the year, depending on what they're selling. There is here this festival of roses that happen every year in May next to Marrakesh. So after the harvest, they have this huge festival, and it's very well known around Morocco and now also internationally. And also each region have a different specialty depending on the resources and the traditions that they have. And every type of crafts and artisanship is a form of expression for these artisans. And you also represent their livelihood. That's how they make their living. That's how they raise their family and everything. And this sector is very sensitive to outside factors. So, like I said, there is 35 million people in Morocco, and 2 million Moroccans are artisans. So that's a huge chunk. Craftsman work accounts for 8% of Morocco's GDP, which honestly surprised me. I didn't know it was that much. So these are some examples of artisanship in Morocco. So we have pottery, carpet making. Carpet making is one of my favorites, especially Amazigh women that do this because it's very tedious and hard and detailed. Plaster carving and zillige. These are very, very old. You can still see them in Granada, Alhambra. One of the examples, this has been done like even in the 700s. And they still do them the same way today in Morocco. So also coppersmith, leatherwork, argan oil, tree over the Moroccan argan oil, and weaving. So some of the challenges that they suffer from is that they heavily rely on tourism. So for example, during COVID, they lost 95% of their earnings, and that resulted in closing 35% of the shops. Also, it's a very unpredictable sector. So they're mainly independently owned. They're affected by outside factors like tourism. When tourism is high, then they earn. When it's not high, then they lose a lot of money. And also they're very affected by the infrastructure. If the souk or the Medina is not nice, travelers are not going to come, they're not going to spend their money, so they're not really going to support them. And also in Rabat, for example, in the Medina of Rabat, one time they had to restore the Medina, so they asked the artisans to vacate the premises, and they were not making a living for like a few months because they had to restore the place. And also there is a huge lack of organization within this sector. Mainly because this sector is very self-reliant. These artisans do not have insurance, they don't have social security, they have very minimal help and support, very low representation and advocacy. And also, most artisans are illiterate, very low literacy rates among this sector. They have limited knowledge, so for them it's very hard to run a business profitably. And also, it is very hard to adapt to new selling trends. When you don't know how to read or write, or you barely know how to do it, you can't really create a website or post on social media. That's a huge barrier. So the barriers of growth for this sector is that all of these problems make the younger generation not want to join it. They see members of their families be like hardly making a living out of their job, and it's a very hard job. And so they basically don't want to do it. And these artisans usually live in remote areas. So for them, it's really hard to reach a large audience. Also, this sector is very undervalued, even like within Morocco, the middle and the high class would see them as these little people that do arts and crafts, and yeah, it's not very valuable like to their eyes. When it is, it's been there for centuries. And also they suffer from very poor working conditions. And since the younger generation is discouraged, it's very challenging to find skilled employees. So here we're going to talk about one of the main conflicts is the intermediary model. So the artisans, they make their production, they sell it to very low price to the intermediary, which then sell it very high to the customers. So the production of the artisans usually requires microloans, which they take a very high interest because they do not have savings or anything like that. And they do not handle the distribution channel. They do not have any control over it. And they only profit 5 to 20% of their goods retail price. Or they would be underpaid employees in companies and would be paid like minimum wage. So it wouldn't matter how much they produce or how much their product is sold for. And for the intermediary, this person can be anywhere from a merchant to a bigger company to an international business person. They bargain with artisans, try to get the price as low as they can. They pay below value. They're considered to be educated, so they have more knowledge about selling and running a business, and they facilitate the supply chain and distribution process. On the other hand, the consumer, they enjoy the creative stores because the middleman has more money to invest in a nice store and to make the products look really nice. So they enjoy the accessibility, the proximity to bigger cities because they're not in villages, they would be in the imperial cities, for example. And it's very challenging for consumers to differentiate between equitable and non-equitable businesses. So the issue with the intermediary model is the lack of accountability, because it's very challenging to supervise the supply chain because it goes from hand to hand to hand. So it's very hard to see where the problem is, if there is a problem, and to monitor the quality. And also artisans do not profit directly or equitably, and it's an exploitation of artisans. So all of this leads to negative impacts, which is the decline of the artisan sector in Morocco. So it perpetuates the modest social status of artisans. They keep being humble and poor. They don't have a lot of money to invest to improve their business. It maintains the undervaluation of artisans' work, so people still look down on their work, on their crafts. The younger generation is still chasing office job, and there is a huge loss of culture, knowledge, and heritage, and this poses a threat to the survival of traditional craftsmanship in Morocco. So some of existing solutions are the co-ops, so all the members of the artisans community come together and they're one entity and they work towards all the same goal. They have more capital to invest, every person invests a little bit, and then they're more powerful than just one single artisan shop, and that provides for everybody a support system. Also, the improvements of the souk infrastructure, so this is the Medina of Fez. They improve the Medina so it looks nicer to people. People are more drawn to come here and to shop for souvenirs rather than other businesses that aren't good. Another existing solution are the DMOs. This is the DMO of Marrakesh. So they promote artisans on their platform. They provide the resources and knowledge to travelers. They encourage shopping in souks, and they propose activities around craftsmen. You can go and meet the artisans, have lunch with them, have a workshop. You can learn all types of activities with them, and that's great for cultural exchange and helping them directly. So here you can see that there is some pictures. They give you some context, which is very helpful for travelers. Some issues with these existing solutions is that in the co-ops, the artisans are illiterate, like I mentioned before. So that makes them very vulnerable to exploitation. Some co-ops are not even co-ops, that is used as a marketing base. They would be more like a company, and they know that the word co-op is trendy and that would bring customer in, so they use that at their benefit. And the souk infrastructure is helpful, but that's mostly done in larger cities. So that's not very inclusive or fair to the villages and the rural area. The issue with the DMO is that not all of them give a lot of information. The one that I showed you before was Marrakesh. This one is Rabat, and Souk Sabat is a very big souk. I go there all the time. They have so many different kinds of artisans. They only give you this really small paragraph that I know is in French, but it doesn't give any information. So yeah. Some of the solution I propose is the support system from the government, improving the presence and the strategies of the artisan representation department within the Chamber of Commerce. So I think they should improve the representation of the artisans within the Chamber of Commerce and assist the artisans in educating them and training them to better run their business, provide them with resources to profitably run their business, facilitate business development, like for example, pricing, they can help them better price their products, to create partnership opportunities with local architects. Local architects, for example, the Moroccan tile world, the Zilij is very popular. If someone wants to redo their kitchen, they can have a network of artisans, and these artisans can come and be like a contractor. So they would help them that way, and also help improve their work conditions. Another way the government can help is by creating a certification program for equitable stores, co-op, and artisans-owned businesses. This would assist travelers to better choose where to shop and to help the local community. And also this would assist artisans by taking out of the intermediary-owned and equitable stores, and that would also value their works. So based on the authenticity principle that suggests that indigenous tourism should be done by indigenous people, it's important to provide authentic experiences and a healthy cultural exchange between both travelers and the natives. And all of that would lead to preserving the culture and centuries-old knowledge. So based on the authenticity principle, we should improve the co-ops by developing policies to make it community-centered. So it should majoritarily be owned by the artisans. Artisans should be the shareholders of these co-ops. And also they would have the opportunity to train younger generation, which would be an additional source of income for them. And that would help perpetuate the artisan knowledge. And to also create tourism activities. I have an example here of the Anu co-op that shows you different kinds of model. You have the middleman model. The artisans only make 4% of the retail price, as opposed to the artisans owned model where they make 80% of the retail price. Here you can see the Anu co-op. This is one product that they sell. It's a rug. You can see all the people that make it, and you can see in the dark blue how much the artisan makes. So that's a little less than 2/3. And they have a lot of tourism activities like artisans visits, artisan meal, and workshop. This is the last solution, artisans event, creating event regionally to promote the different villages, the different resources that they have in every single village. And artisans would profit directly. That would shorten the supply chain, and that would shift the stigmatization, and they would regain the value. And that's it.
For questions, are there any questions on the app or on Zoom rather, or in the audience?
How'd you find the co-op?
Through my own research, I was looking for equitable co-ops for my own company. I wanted to be able to give travelers the opportunity to actually meet with real artisans and to actually help support them see their way of life, like a very immersive, real thing. So I was looking up and I found this Anu co-op. They're located in Fez. Yeah, that's basically how I found them.
Tell us a little bit about your company that you're starting right now. And I just love how you are actually implementing, you know, like this analysis and all like the you know, the findings and how it informs you to actually be a responsible tourism business. So tell us about it.
It's good, but it's also hard because I'm Moroccan, and even when you're Moroccan, it's hard to differentiate between both the actual artisans that are making the products and the middlemen and this corporation that sometimes look like they are the artisans, but they're not. So I really try to make my research be fair and like just like aware of like reading that sometimes like greenwashing and all that. Like I try to be like aware when I read. And just like basically like try to read like the website, try sometimes to call, to ask around, because Morocco, even though it's big, is very small. Everybody knows everything. So it's just like asking word to mouth. That's how you learn. You know.
Are there any more questions?
Just Tiffany.
I asked you so many questions.
I'm just really proud to see, you know, our graduates really taking what they've learned from the program into their practice, like into their tourism practice or like, their profession. It's just, this is the way to change, and to decolonize the current travel and tourism industry. So thank you, thanks to every one of you who have presented.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm gonna be really quick. I know that it's been a long day. Thank you so much for those who are still here. Like, thank you so much for sticking with us. I'm just gonna make it really brief. Thank you so much, everyone, and congratulations to all of our presenters, our students. I'd like to thank you all for your inspiring projects. It was a privilege to be part of your journey of learning and unlearning and reflection and application of what you've learned. Special thanks to Mr. Wesley Espinosa for his inspiring keynotes on the importance of putting communities in the heart of responsible travel and destination stewardship. Also a huge honor to have our third annual student conference hosted by our valued partner, the Department for International Travel and Tourism Studies at Johnson & Wales University. So here are a few updates before we go, a few updates about what we're going to do, or like what are some exciting projects on the horizon at RISE Travel Institute. So RISE, in 2 weeks, in 2 weeks, we're leading a group of alumni to Yucatan, Mexico, on our second experiential journey, visiting indigenous-led projects and learning about how coastal communities organize themselves to support their own economy and mangrove conservation efforts and so on. So we're really excited about that. And then our new flagship cohort will start on the 26th of February, so another cohort. And I would love to invite all those who are here today who are not a student, to consider joining us, joining the program if you feel inspired by today's presentations. And we are working really hard on finalizing our over 50-page long ebook on decolonizing travel for travelers. And we're really proud of what we're putting together. So stay tuned, sign up for our newsletter so that you will be the first one to receive it when it's launched. And then there's going to be like more events and exciting webinars, new programs this year. We're going to have a study abroad pre-departure program for university students, and we're really looking forward to being able to share that content, on cultural humility, responsible tourism, responsible travel with not just tourism majors, but general university students. We have a new podcast season 4, the RISE Traveler podcast, and this upcoming season will really focus on interviews with critical tourism studies, critical theory academics, scholars, and activists, and social justice, environmental justice activists. So we are really, really excited about the deep dives into these topics. Call for partnerships. So if any of the work at RISE resonates with you, at your current work, please, reach out to us. And I'm so happy to announce a new partnership with CREST, with the Center for Responsible Travel. So in 2024 and beyond, we're going to partner on, a number of projects, exciting projects, hoping to bring responsible travel to a wider public. And thank you so much to the organizing committee of this student conference. Thank you, Jody, Natalie, and everybody who's involved, and all our volunteers, because without you, our amazing team of volunteers, we wouldn't be here today. And I think that's pretty much it. Thanks again for joining us today. I hope you'll leave this conference feeling inspired and hopeful and motivated to work together for a more equitable, sustainable, inclusive, and decolonized and community-centered travel and tourism industry. Thank you so much.